Okay. All right. So let's start the podcast. David, maybe you can repeat what you just said because
No,
I thought that was an interesting way to introduce the
well,
conversation. So we're going to talk about nation building. So the question tonight is nation building ever a good idea? And
I don't think
let's
so.
see.
And you guys may know differently than me, but I can't think of a situation in history where a country has ever become free, but that its own citizens led the charge. Not that that hasn't happened, but I can't. Do you guys know of anything?
Maybe Germany and Japan after World War II, but what a price to pay, right? I mean,
Yeah, well,
yeah, I mean, it's sort of like that's the only way out of general devastation. But yeah, I would. I
but
would.
in that case, they attacked other countries,
Right.
and they, for lack of a better way of putting it, were trying to find a way to make those countries not free or subservient to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a kind of different than what I was talking about. But
Right.
point well taken.
Yeah. I just mean that these are countries that were the citizenry, or at least a majority, seemed to be pretty happy to live without a democracy, at least. And then afterward, World War II, it was basically imposed on them, and they seem to be fine with it. But yes, I agree. In the history of most nations, when a country comes in like the United States saying, okay, we're gonna hold elections, we're going to colonize you, or at least invade you, and then we're going to build institutions and hold elections, and then you'll build a democracy and you guys are going to be fine. No, I don't think that ever works.
Well, I guess one of the differences there, in my thinking, is that by that point they were defeated and the guns had stopped.
Right.
So
Yeah. And it's also, and this, a lot of people will get offended by this, and if you say it the wrong way, and I wouldn't say it's, for lack of a better term, it's you need to reach a certain point in your culture, I believe. Maybe not culture, but I don't know, the way people think or their level of education, socialization, or whatever, to make democracy or electoral democracy successful. I sincerely believe that, for example, you take a third world country just barely out of a feudal social structure, and if you hold elections, they're not going to be anything close to a true democracy that comes out of there. The feudal social structures will still influence,
that's a very good point.
will determine who they vote for.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've seen it up close.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me is, and this is not necessarily about nation building, but in a way it is, when the Soviet Union fell or fell apart, however you describe it, it seems, I could be wrong, but it seems like a lot of the thinking in the free world was that, oh, they're free now and freedom will automatically go in and fill the vacuum.
Right.
That has never happened.
No.
When there's a vacuum of power,
Right.
the nefarious almost always take over.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, you almost have to say that you have to have a deep understanding of how electoral democracies work. Right? I sincerely believe that electoral democracies when they work well, they work really great, but they're kind of fragile too. You know, they're easily subverted if you have enough of a population, a segment of the population that says, you know what, we're going to use the device, you know, the freedoms of electoral democracy to pursue a basically a undemocratic goal.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, I've seen it so much. Hitler was elected democratically. So,
Well, so is Putin.
yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, so many places. That's you know, so you can't just set up the institutions and say, okay, it's gonna work now. It's not.
So I see your images. I see them kind of like frozen. Do you guys see the same thing?
No, you're
No?
see, you guys are fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's just me. Um, but I can hear you just fine. So I
Okay.
guess, yeah. I mean,
That's the important thing.
yeah. I mean, it's okay. I think people might see this and maybe you'll be like frozen, but hopefully not. I'm not sure. But I think like you guys raised like some good points. So you're saying, Raul, that the difference between, because I think that's when we're talking about nation building, I think that's, and we look at the history of it. It's true that, you know, the after World War II, I think things worked fairly well, and there was a degree of nation building involved with the reconstitution of Japan and Germany, Italy, and it seemed that it worked. It worked very well. I mean, those countries are thriving democracies to this day. But that hasn't worked with Afghanistan, with Iraq. So you're saying that, Raul, that the problem there is that there needs to be a certain level of civilization or a certain structure of the society before you implement democracy, and that's why those two cases were different, like the 1945 and 2000s, for the lack of a better.
Yeah, you know, like Germany, Japan, and Italy, even though they got defeated in the war, were advanced industrialized nations, and that presupposes a level of education and literacy in throughout the population. And
Okay.
and I would also think that, and this is just maybe you know, just a hypothesis, I think that you need a certain level of a culture of introspection, reflectiveness, and scholarship,
Okay.
so that people are really thinking about, okay, how do we make democracy work, rather than just saying, this is what I want and we have the majority, so we'll do this. It's, you know, I don't know if I'm wrong or right, but
Well, I think there's also the issue that and I'm trying to figure out, like, I think that's a big question, you know, why did it work so well in 1945, didn't work so well in the 2000s? I think what you said, David, is also very interesting. The fact that those people were defeated, right? The Nazis were defeated,
yeah,
the fascists were defeated, the Japanese army was defeated, although that's a little bit less clear, perhaps because maybe there was more potential for resistance theoretically. I don't know.
No, they were thoroughly defeated.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, they were defeated in conventional warfare. But then again, you can say the same thing about Iraq.
And
Right.
nuclear warfare.
yeah,
Yes, but you can say the same thing about the army of Iraq, for example, and things didn't work out the same way. That's what I mean. That, but in any case, for the most part, it seems that certainly in Afghanistan, right? In Afghanistan, there wasn't a complete defeat of the Taliban because they were still fighting a form of guerrilla warfare, certainly, but they never really went away the same way the Nazis were, you know, were obliterated, or the fascists, you know.
mhm.
So maybe that's another reason why it worked before, but it didn't work now, because you do need to get that out of the way first before you engage in this kind of nation building as well.
Yeah. You know, but plus of all the approaches to nation building, I think what was done in Iraq and Afghanistan is probably the least well thought out. I mean, they, I remember reading back then, the people who were supposed to be the specialists in the region, who were most familiar or most, who specialized in the culture, in the language, in the history, were not listened to. And basically the State Department or whoever, Department of Defense or CIA or whatever, just said, oh, this is how we'll do it.
In Afghanistan, you said?
In both Afghanistan and Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the news threads that you can follow, how the specialists in the Middle East were basically chucked aside and said, no, we're going to do it our way.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a good idea.
Well, it's there's something, change of subject, sorry.
No.
I'm still on subject, but change of thinking. There's something that just strikes me as moronic about the idea of we're going to force you to be
Right.
free.
Right.
That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It's oxymoronic about instituting freedom at the point of a gun. That doesn't make sense. That's not how
Mhm.
freedom comes. You
Mhm.
you may have to preserve freedom, or you may have to win freedom at the point of a gun, but you can't. Ideas, good or bad, cannot be defeated with guns.
Right.
They can only be defeated with better ideas. You may defeat a people, but you won't defeat the idea.
Well,
That's
ye-
just my.
yes and no, because for example, like when you look at the Nazis, for example, I mean, I get what you're saying, but at the end of the day, some of these conflicts are defined by the military, right? Are decided by the military. It's not like essentially the West proved the Nazis wrong necessarily intellectually.
Yeah.
That's not the war. That's not how the war ended, right? The war ended with a military victory, not just from the West, but also from the East. And the same thing with Japan. They were defeated militarily. So I think, yes, the struggle between ideas is very important, but at the same time, there is a military component to it. And in Nazi Germany, people were able to implement a democracy forcefully. Same thing in Japan, but those democracies thrived, right? And in the eastern part of Germany, and in other countries, the communists did the same thing. It wasn't democracy, but it was their system, and it was implemented forcefully, and it also worked, for lack of a better term, because those were regimes that lasted for 4 or 5 decades.
I cannot differ with anything you were saying, but
Yeah.
I am thinking that it is that the reason that democracy or freedom worked in Germany and Japan was not because of the guns. It was because the people were persuaded that this was good.
Yeah, and these, I think, these are, again, for lack of a better term,
The guns
cultures.
helped.
Yeah,
The guns
cultures.
definitely helped.
Yeah.
I don't think we can.
Yeah.
There's any argument that can be made that the guns didn't help.
But these
And
are
it wouldn't have been.
cultures.
It wouldn't have been possible without the guns in the first
Yeah,
place.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, at least to tear down the tyrannical structures. But yeah, these I believe are, for lack of a better term, cultures that are in the first place receptive to democracy. I mean, Germany was a democracy before the Nazi
Yes.
party took over, and in fact it became Hitler rose to power through democracy.
Well, so is Italy, actually.
Yeah.
And Japan,
know.
I think Japan had a brief experience with democracy.
Yeah, they had a brief, but they never had. They had started rumblings of at least local elections, but the more important thing is that there's because I've always wondered about this, why as coming from a country that was a U.S. colony for about 50 years,
The Philippines.
and then the U.S. wanted to make the Philippines as a showcase of democracy in the Far East, in Asia, and it still is a democracy, but I don't think democracy is working as well as it should, especially right now. The president who actually says, "I'm going to send out death squads," and most of the people say, "Hey, yeah, good idea, great idea," and so popular.
Right. Well, is it still a working democracy, the Philippines? Because I think it might not be, right?
It's teetering.
You still have family there?
I do. I have siblings over there. It's still a free press, but journalists get killed, right? Activists get killed. So it's teetering. And I've always wondered about
sort of on the brink of
the
solution.
There's that you can't just introduce and build institutions of democracy in a country that's basically feudal, or maybe just coming out of a feudal social setting. I mean, democracy in Western Europe or in the United States, you go back as far as the Magna Carta, and you see that the change in the mentality of the people did not happen overnight or in one generation. No. You had to go through all that learning process.
As I understand the Magna Carta, at least in European civilization, was the first time that the monarchy was held to the same laws as the citizens.
Right.
But
well, as the nobility, not yet the citizens.
It was iffy.
Right.
It took a while, but it was a start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had to go through.
It was a long process.
It was a long process. The peasant revolution,
especially in Britain, because in Britain it was really a long process.
Yeah, and it was helped along by the plague, actually. Because that led to a labor shortage, and that's when the peasantry started to say, "Hey, we have some power here. We can demand higher pay." But anyway. But it can be, that process can be truncated quite a lot. If you look at the experience, for example, of Japan and South Korea and Taiwan,
right?
They went from non-democratic societies to fairly well-functioned democracies in the span of what, like 50 years, 60 years, something like that.
Yes.
But it's not just a country that can do that. You have to be prosperous. You have to be highly educated, I think, and they also have a tradition ingrained in the country of scholarship, of philosophy, for lack of a better term, of thinking about things deeply.
Okay.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's interesting. So do you think those are sort of like prerequisites for instituting these democratic systems? And that's certainly that Iraq and Afghanistan lack, right? Especially Afghanistan, because they're a very tribalistic
Right.
society. So they're
Yeah.
certainly not used to that way of life or that way of doing things, and not a very scholastic society. Um,
Yeah.
I mean that, yeah, that's a very strong hypothesis.
Yeah. And
I have to step away for a minute. My wife just got home. I'll be right back.
sure.
Sure,
She's
that's fine.
more important than you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not offended by that. But you know, Afghanistan, in a way, they realize what needs to be done, and that's why they, you know, try to promote the education of girls and women, and just wasn't enough time. You know, maybe it's too drastic a leap, and it's only the urban population really who are, you know.
Yeah. And it's true that, I mean, the country changed quite a bit in the last 20 years, but at
Mhm.
the end of the day, it doesn't seem like it was enough.
No.
Um, and the Taliban, clearly they were never defeated, you know.
No.
And in Afghanistan in particular, I mean, that might be a problem, you know. That's almost certainly a big problem, that all of those cases that we're talking about in World War II, like I said, you know, you sort of need to get rid, and like you said, you need to get rid of those structures of power before you can do that, you know, because if not, it's very difficult, because you still have that old structure of power, and they're, you know, they're solid.
Yeah.
So that might have been a fatal mistake at the end of the day.
Right. No, plus on top of that, you had massive corruption going on. So resources that probably would have been, you know, sorely, that would have been benefit, you know, brought with it a lot of benefit, led to a lot of benefits, was siphoned off by whoever, the president, and what part of the officialdom basically siphoned off all the money that the US was providing in Afghanistan.
Well, corruption is, it's very hard to have a functioning democracy with a lot of corruption.
Yeah.
That is a flaw of democracy. Well, not a flaw of democracy, I guess, but it's a fragility, right?
Mhm.
Corruption sort of like eats away at the functioning of the system.
Right.
And that's why
Right.
a lot of countries, like, you know, like they're, Russia is a good example of, you know, there's a lot of corruption, so it's hard, even though they have theoretically the institutions,
Yeah.
it doesn't really properly work. There's a couple of other reasons, but the corruption is certainly a big part of that,
Yeah.
and it's very hard to actually have it work.
Yep. You know.
It's a fragile system, and yeah, corruption is, I mean, it's almost fatal to it.
And we don't have any of that in the United States.
Not to the point that it's debilitating to the
Yeah,
the functioning of,
it's a degree, right? It's a degree, like
Yeah.
when you reach a certain threshold,
Right.
it starts to kind of like fall apart, you know.
Yeah.
Like Brazil, for example, you know, like Brazil is it still works, you know, like countries like Brazil, or I think India is in a similar place, or Argentina, but you know, that you can still work things out, like it's still working, but it doesn't work properly, right? It doesn't work how it should work, because you do have that a lot of corruption, and that really corrupts the system. So, but it's still working, but then you get to a certain point that it stops working. It doesn't even work anymore.
Yeah.
And then it stops being democracy, and then you have something like Russia.
And just even the disincentive that corruption poses to you know, economic activity, it gets really debilitating. If you have to pay a bribe to some government and some government official every step of the way. And that's not even the worst of it. The worst of it is the bribe you have to pay to the top dog. And let's say they ask something like, "Oh, I want 5% of your total cost." You know, if your total cost, 5% of it is something you're paying as bribes, that is a very burdensome cost to any enterprise.
It is.
know.
And to your point, David, because you mentioned the United States, I think we've mentioned this here a lot before, but well, the United States does have corrupt, like to me, the biggest problem, for example, in the United States right now is the power of corporations, how corporations have increasing power with the decision makers, right?
Right.
So that is like one example of how things stop working, because you can only really have a working democracy if the decision makers are somewhat independent of those special interests.
Yeah.
If they are completely dependent, then it can't really work anymore. And there are, nations in which you see that happening, but the United States is not there yet. But I do think that the evolution is not good, right? The increasing power of corporations and over the decision makers, I think that's a matter of concern.
So how do we stop that? How do we slow it down? Reverse it?
Yeah, I think it needs to be stopped for sure. I think like making laws, I think it's kind of essential, because if you don't make, there needs to be laws that limit, I think, the amounts of contribution. It's kind of like going in the opposite direction, right? Unfortunately, but you need to have basically checks and balances, right? You need to have systems that impede that erosion, right? So I think in a society of laws, you do that mostly with laws.
I think we somehow should recapture the spirit of at least some of the, not all of it, but certain parts of the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt when he unleashed the trust busters on U.S. Steel and Standard Oil and it's just that
True. Yeah, that's another thing.
we need a little bit more skepticism with respect to corporations. Not right now, where billionaires are sort of thought of as heroes, as they're not heroes. They're not Satan, but they're not heroes either. And we should stop idolizing Elon Musk or whoever.
Uh,
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Sure.
And they're not all bad.
They're not all bad, but they're not paragons of virtue either. And their primary concern are their business ventures, not the welfare of the nation. If the welfare of the nation means that they should lose their power, then they're probably not for that.
Now, I personally, I would not put Bill Gates and Elon Musk into that category of being driven by things other than what's good for the country, because Bill Gates has spent a lot of money trying to find a cure or treatments for malaria all over the world.
Yeah.
And in fact, in 2020, polio was wiped in the wild, was wiped out on the entire continent of Africa. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk, he has aspirations that he doesn't meet, but he also has aspirations that he does meet. You know, when he talked about having electric cars, the reason he's doing that, my thinking, is that, well, if we're going to reach carbon neutral standards, we're going to have electric cars.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and we don't know how to do that real well
Mhm.
yet. So
Mhm.
he is figuring out how to do it.
No,
And-
no,
and-
I don't want to be misunderstood. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that these people are, like evil or bad, but I'm saying, I do believe they have an outsized voice.
Agreed.
And there needs to be greater balance on that.
And also not all of them have good intentions.
No, yeah,
I mean,
That's true.
Bill
Yeah.
Gates has good intentions right now.
But-
Before, I'm not so sure. I mean,
He was awful when
yeah, I mean,
Microsoft
I've
was a
read lots of
monopoly.
stuff about Bill Gates that is not so flattering,
Yeah.
But I actually admire Bill Gates a lot for his philanthropic
Right.
endeavors. I think he in his stage of his life, for sure. I mean, he's
Yeah.
trying to-
You know,
But I think he set back the growth of the computer industry for 20 years while Microsoft was.
But the
Yeah.
point is, I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of like the problem is when corporate interests have the politicians in their pockets. That obviously creates a huge problem
know,
for the function of democracy.
I don't know anyone who's perfect.
Right.
No, I mean, no.
I know no one who I agree with 100%.
Right.
I know a lot of people I agree with 95% or 90% or 85%,
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
That's why.
and if I hold out for somebody that I agree with 100%, I'm going to hold out forever.
But
Yeah,
let's,
that's why, it's not that they're bad. It's just that the way society is set up right now, some people have an outsized voice.
and I think
True.
this is not. Yeah, I mean, this is perhaps we're deviating a little bit from the topic, but I think it's worth like remembering that. Yeah, why does democracy work? Why does it not work? Right. I think that's
Right.
that those are, and I think it's good that we're pointing that out, because I think that clarifies a little bit why it hasn't worked in Iraq, why it hasn't worked in Afghanistan, why it has worked in Italy or Germany or Japan. So it makes things a little bit clear. But let me to advance the conversation, because I think we made some progress here. I think hopefully I think these are very important questions, right? I mean, we've seen so many debacles, so many terrible things happen in international relations. I think the decision makers should really be asking these questions right now, because hopefully they can learn from the mistakes, and we can have better decisions made in the future. But so we've identified some of the reasons why it hasn't worked, but even when nation building works, is that a good idea? Is that a good policy to go into countries and try to change them, even when it does work, even when it's done well and it has a probability of working?
Has it ever been done well?
Well, I mean, like we said, Japan, Germany, Italy, kind of,
Right.
it kind of worked, but and that was an extreme case, right? Because they had to do something.
Yeah, and
After
these were
World War II.
societies that were devastated, that really had to build up from scratch. Maybe Italy not as much, but certainly Germany and Japan.
Well,
But as a general rule for international relations, is this a good method to have? Because let's not forget, I mean, in the early 2000s, I mean, this was, at least the United States decided that, this was the way to go. From now on, we're going to go into these nations, we're going to rebuild them, we're going to build democracy in the world that way. Is that something that is feasible?
well, as I recall, with Germany and Japan, the Allies required the absolute unconditional surrender,
Yes. Yeah.
which means that you're going to do what we say.
Mhm.
And
And heads rolled. Yeah, and
Yeah.
heads rolled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
that kind of set the stage for how they were going to conduct their business as a country thereafter.
right.
Yeah, but we've established that, yeah, you do need that military victory first, and that's a mistake that they've been making. Vietnam is another. There was never military victory. It's hard to do any nation building when you don't have a military victory.
Well, I agree that in those cases we had to have a military victory first before we could play that card that you're going to do what we say no matter what, unconditional surrender. But we still had to persuade the people of Japan and the people of Germany that they would be better off if they could determine for themselves the course of their country
Mhm.
by way of elections and so forth.
Right.
Did we do it all absolutely correctly? No. But it's a hell of a lot better than it was.
Mhm. Yeah, and in the case of Germany, there is still that collective memory of when they were a democracy, and in fact, you could argue with that at least towards the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century, the Germany, even though the Kaiser was almost an absolute monarch, was one of the more progressive countries in the world in terms of women's suffrage and social supports and things like that. And so there is still, I think, a memory of that, and there's enough people who know how to make it work. And Japan is totally different. When the emperor said, "Oh, we're going to do this," then basically everyone says, "Yeah, let's do that." I mean, it helped that the militarists were basically, by the occupation.
Going forward, how should we approach these situations that they try to deal with the situation in the Middle East through this nation building process? Obviously it didn't work in the best
No.
way. Is this something that we as a general rule, should we acknowledge, like you say, that if a society is not at a certain moment in history, you shouldn't really try to do this nation building process? You should instead basically let them figure it out, right?
Right. Or ask them, what do you want to do? And if we find that we're in agreement, that's something that we'd like to support, then go ahead and support it. But don't go in there and just says, this is what you'll do, and then you're going to become a great, a prosperous country because if you do this. Well, that's the worst.
Well, to me, even with in the case of a country that one defeats, I don't know, you still have to persuade
Yes.
the people
Yes.
living in that country that
Right.
this is a good thing to do.
Right.
For example, and this is not countries, but in the United States, in 1964, we passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and and the thing is those laws may have been necessary. They were good things, but it still didn't remove from us the necessity of persuading people that skin, the color of a person's skin, is not a good thing to judge them on. We still had to persuade,
Right.
even though we passed the law. The law may be necessary, but the persuasion is always necessary.
Hmm.
And to me, that is true of Japan, it's true of Germany, it's true of Afghanistan. You know, we make more progress, I think, with the power of our example than we do with the example of our power. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
especially when it doesn't work out, and
Yeah.
then it really backfires.
Yeah, but you know, even back then, 2003, 2004, and maybe this is just me eternally pessimistic about projects like these. I already was thinking, this is not going to work. What you think you want to do, you will not be able to do. Because you are asking people to take a leap that's just, you know,
Too big.
a social reordering and a change of mindset that might be, you know, a bridge too far, even with, you know, I think that, you know, the emancipation of women in Afghanistan from what the Taliban had done up to that point was as worthy a humanitarian project as anything you can think of, you know. And it's just too bad that seems like that project has been ended, although the Taliban says we're not going to be as bad as we used to be. You know?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
We're
Yeah,
only going to be slightly bad.
Yeah. You know.
it's very unfortunate. Yeah, it's certainly very unfortunate.
Yeah. You know. And
You know what's funny to me with Afghanistan, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, you know, but my perception is that Ronald Reagan got a lot of flack for arms for the Contras or whatever, you know, when Congress had said, don't do this, in a way. And he got a lot of flack for that. And it may have been deserved. But at the same time, Senator Charlie Wilson redirected funds to help Afghanistan fight against the Russians after Congress had said, don't do this. and Charlie Wilson is praised and Ronald Reagan is denigrated. You know, I don't get that. It's the same thing to me, but maybe you guys know better.
No, I'm not super familiar with.
I would only say that coming from a country that inherited the same social structures from Spain in terms of a plantation economy and the exploitation of peasants. The people, basically the landowners, that was what the Contras were aligned with, are not a people who deserve our, you know, our support. These are not, you know, These people are going to keep the peasants in poverty forever if they can. You know,
I agree.
and you know, through abuses, through death squads, through murder and mayhem, and we should not be aligning with people like that. You know, and but that's just, you know, that's what I see. You know, because I see the same thing, seen the same thing from where I grew up, and it's the biggest, to me, the biggest obstacle to economic development, in that you have this group of landowners who are basically, you know, they're happy with the way things are. You know, they're living in luxury, and they're like living like kings. They're living like nobility.
It sounds like Georgia in 1855.
Exactly. You know, I've been to visited a it's called a hacienda owner, a sugar plantation owner, and I was in high school then. It was actually Christmas Day when we landed there. Not landed, but when we arrived there, because it was, we were on our way to some Boy Scout activity, and we were stopping over to the grandfather of one of the Boy Scouts in my troop. And he was, when we got there, he was standing in front of his house, you know, and all dignified and everything. And then the peasantry would come up and bow to him, and you know, take his hand, and just you know, gesture of what's the term, like bowing to the monarch. And then he would whip out a wad of cash, and then give it to each one who comes up to him. And it's like, for me, it's like, oh my God, like I'm in the 1800s or 1700s, and this is the local earl or whatever the equivalent, and he's,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, like you said, you know, it's like a continuation of feudalism,
Right.
You know,
And
So-
then you can't just set up a democracy, an electoral democracy in that system.
yeah, it's
cannot.
hard.
Yeah.
It's hard because it puts democracy, you know, like you want for other people to share your system of government, your freedoms and everything. But at the same time, it does seem that, and what has happened in the last 20 years or even more, it reinforces the notion that it really needs to come from whatever you want to call it, persuasion, you know, but it needs to come from a desire of the people themselves, you know,
Mhm.
to assume that responsibility,
Right.
and for people to have that kind of way of thinking, right?
Right. And to know what it means.
Yes, because
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, if democracy is rule of the people, you cannot expect democracy to thrive if the people are not willing to take that responsibility and wanting to take that responsibility. So it
Yeah.
kind of, that's another element you need. If
Right.
not, it's very hard for that particular system of work of government to work.
Mhm. I mean, because what happens is that just to when peasants, when the peasantry, the basically the indentured workers were encouraged to vote, they would ask their landlord, okay, who do we vote for?
Who do we vote for? Yeah.
Yeah. You
Well,
know,
you know, I
and
was-
then, well, one more. This older landlord, this is a different person I'm talking to. He died, and his son, who's more progressive, took over. And then the next election, the head of the peasant, you know, they do have some hierarchy. The head of the peasants came up to him and said, "Who should we vote for?" And he said, "I'm not going to tell you. You vote for who you want." And the peasant said, you know, the leader said, "No, we don't know. We don't want to do that. You tell us what to vote for." Because if they vote for the wrong person and somebody finds out that they voted for somebody who you know, who they shouldn't have voted for, they will get punished for it,
Right.
you know. So the feudal structures are still there, you know, even with democracy.
And
supposedly.
sometimes it's also that people don't really understand the notion of democracy, you know.
Yeah.
I worked, well, for one day, I worked in St. Paul. I worked for the, you know, it was the primaries that I was doing, like the working, I was an interpreter,
Yeah.
and I was working at the polls. And there's a lot of Asian people in particular in that part of St. Paul. And even though I wasn't interpreting for Asian people, you know, I was kind of like working there as well in the polls. And I did get like 3 or 4 people that just told me, tell me who to vote for because I don't know.
Right.
They didn't really, and these were all like, you know, immigrants that had become
Mhm.
citizens, well, like myself, but they didn't really understand the notion that this was a something, a very important part of the process is that they had to make that decision.
Right.
And that's a cultural thing that you, without that notion that, you know, you need to make that decision, that the people is in charge of choosing its representatives, that you can't really have democracy
No.
without that.
No, you can't, you
So
know.
that's why it cannot be imposed.
Right.
Now, not to change the subject,
Sure.
You
but
can change subjects if you want.
Um,
But just to warn you guys, I do need to, we need to end a lot earlier today because I have my sister-in-law is here. We're gonna have dinner. So
Sure.
it's gonna be maybe we can do like 15 more minutes and
Absolutely.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
all right.
all right. Now, did I hear you say that you're an immigrant? Where are you from?
Me?
Portugal?
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Do you like it here?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's good. I've been here for a while. Yeah.
He's still here, isn't he?
Still here, even in spite of Minnesotan winters.
So you do have Portuguese citizenship,
Yeah.
right? So you can, you know, worst comes to worst, you can go to the EU, still choose to be here. That means something.
If things fall apart, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think that'll happen. It'll get a little bumpy, but you know,
But it's
Probably
important.
it's bumpy all over the world, actually.
No, it you know, it is
It's a
what
bumpy world.
it is
Yeah.
what it is, you know.
Yeah.
There are challenges, but hopefully we'll all figure this out at some point.
We're
mean,
just
hope-
wait. We're just waiting.
Most importantly, we won't all go extinct anytime soon.
I'm just waiting for some people to die. A natural death. You know, not early, not prematurely, just live out their lives. And I think it'll get better. And hopefully it gets better soon, fast enough before the worst part of global warming, climate change hits us. That's the thing. That's the only thing that, you know, that's the race.
Yeah.
You know, I won't get on my vegan soapbox,
Mhm.
but you guys, you should look into the effect of the meat and dairy industry
Oh,
on global warming.
oh yeah,
It is astounding.
right. Just
And
the, yeah,
just-
go ahead, David.
Deforestation and
And the
the
methane
Amazon.
from just the methane from the poop. That
the burps.
yeah.
It's out of whack.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah, the
Stepping off the soapbox now.
Now we just need to eat less meat. We don't need to totally, eradicate it, but just eat a lot less.
We need to, yeah, I mean, we need to certainly reduce it if you want to
Yeah.
do things more sustainable.
Yeah.
But we need to drink more beer. Or wine.
Drinking more beer, yeah. I mean, some people probably
Actually,
shouldn't, but
doesn't the fermentation kind of add to the global warming problem? The
It may.
greenhouse.
I don't know. You wipe out the meat and dairy, and I'll give up wine.
No. And yeah, so that's nation building.
Yeah. So I guess we're coming to the end of the discussion. So like it does. So what are our general conclusions? I mean, we've identified some of the problems that have occurred, some of the reasons why you can make it work in some cases and you can't make it work in other cases. But as a general rule, I mean, what do you guys think for the future? Like, what are the lessons that we need to learn, and what do we need to change about this?
As it currently stands, in my opinion, nation building is almost always a bad idea.
Right. And I thought that had already been discredited until, Afghanistan and Iraq. People were already saying, no, that's a bad idea. We've tried it before. It doesn't work. And that's why I was here. Suddenly you have, Bush and Colin Powell and what's his name, the Department of Defense guy saying, we're going to do some nation building. I said, what the, have you forgotten the lessons of the past?
Yeah. Well, obviously they did forget.
Yeah, I mean, this is the neocons,
And I think it's become very clear, in the last 20 years, we've all learned these lessons again.
And can you imagine if the 2 trillion spent on Afghanistan was used for domestic, programs?
It's a shame.
That's an appalling waste.
Well, yeah, and I mean it has created a whole lot of misery in an extended portion of the world, and you have a bunch of stuff now that we're not even seeing a lot of the problems that will be apparent, because of all these problems. Like now, who knows what's going to happen in Afghanistan, and it might be even worse than before.
But they might be the Taliban might be preoccupied dealing with ISIS-K. They're not the best of friends, it turns out, which is, I thought, that's
Well, but that ISIS is an example of something that originated because of all those interventions, right? And
exactly.
And maybe it's not the end of it. Maybe we'll see still things that are to come that are a result of all of those debacles, So,
yeah.
Personally, I have difficulty considering either the Taliban or ISIS as an ally in my thinking.
No.
Because with Al Qaeda, I don't think it's very persuasive to kill innocent people.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not.
Sure. Yeah.
And with the Taliban, it's not very persuasive to require that half or approximately half of the population wear bags that only reveal your eyes.
Sure.
Yeah. That's just ludicrous to me. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to be able to, I don't think we're going to be able to force them to see things differently, we have to persuade them to see things differently.
Right.
At a certain point, there comes a time where it's more important to win. It's less important to win than it is to win over.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, and you don't really win unless you win over.
That's correct.
But I just feel bad for mainly for the women in
Yeah,
Afghanistan.
I do too.
It really is, it's gonna be a horrible life for
In those cases, like for example, now we're gonna see in Afghanistan the women being oppressed, and all the problems that will happen there. What is the best way to contribute? Is there any way to contribute to those people, to a betterment of their lives in general, or it's just you just have to wait for something to happen from within?
yeah.
I mean, that's the question.
Well,
One of the
It-
questions.
in my opinion, and I could be wrong on this, I'm going to post a link to a website about, it's a YouTube video about the validity of the 6 degrees of separation. And in my opinion, Bruno and Raul, did I say that right? Raul?
Yeah, it's close enough.
Okay. How do you say it? How do you say it?
It's Raul.
Raul? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that we have to, if I can remember what I was saying, that we have to
It's okay. You lost your train of thought.
6
Yeah,
degrees
I
of
did.
sep-
You got-
6
you got
degrees of
distracted.
I
separation.
did. I got sidetracked on.
On
You
the
were saying
Raul, on the
six-
Raul thing, he was thinking about your name and he got
Yeah,
distracted.
you were saying 6 degrees of separation, David.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That is the discussion that we have here. Fills our quiver with discussions we have with other people.
Mhm.
And believe it or not, there are not 6 degrees of separation between us and somebody with the power to do something, to react to an environment, a situation, or someone. There's actually less than 6 degrees. And so the things that we discuss here fill our quiver with things that we can, issues, points of view that we can raise with other people that we engage with in our lives. And that's where I am.
Sure,
That's what I do.
sure.
Well, I think that the power, I think the power of ideas is, yeah, it's certainly not something to be disregarded. And now that we have a global society with the internet, like all those people in Afghanistan, they're going to have access to the internet, I imagine, or a lot of them will, because people have smartphones these days, even in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
So people, unless a government is powerful enough to prevent even that, and some governments seem to be, North Korea, I think,
China, Russia.
Yeah. I don't know about Russia, but North Korea and China, I think it's hard for people to even access
Right.
stuff on the internet.
I think Russia is also
I don't think about Russia.
maybe not to the extent that China is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, China
Yeah.
is difficult, and I think North Korea
Right.
is even more
Oh.
difficult.
Yeah.
but in most places, I mean, people still will have access to information, and I think the idea of democracy and the to a certain extent the rule of law as well, and this idea of personal freedom, all of this is a little bit, it's infectious, when people believe in it, and
Mhm.
they believe that this can be their lives, that they can live in that kind of society. They will eventually be inspired by it,
Yeah,
and want that, and to force that upon people, to force that on people, it backfires.
right.
It's backfired a number of times,
No,
but you can encourage it.
yeah, but it's a, you know, I there's this book, I put it on the chat. That's a
The,
title,
the
The
weirdest people in the
Weirdest
world.
People in the World, and it's a little bit of I wouldn't say a hard read, but a really, you really have to delve deeply into it. And this is, I told you about, I was saying, oh, how come, I was thinking almost all my life, how come you can't just impose democratic institutions? It'll work right away. And I was saying, like, in the West, it took 1,000 years from Magna Carta almost until today for democracy to. And so this is one book that tries to explain, it's a point of view of how weird means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. I think that's, and these are a group of, I think, anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists who's saying that there are certain things that happened starting with the Middle Ages or even before that.
Western, educated, industrialized.
Industrialized, rich, and democratic. So that's the title of the book, The Weirdest People in the World. It's not the easiest read. They'll pull things from anthropology, history, sociology, neuroscience, psychology, but it sort of starts to answer for me why democracy, it's the greatest thing, I think, but it's not for everyone, because you have to reach certain preconditions for it to work for you. And I would wish if the whole world would be able to attain those preconditions and make things, a lot better for everyone. But it's one explanation, and it doesn't explain North Korea, South Korea, and Japan, why they were able to do it so fast. And they did not go through the same process, but nobody gets everything right all the time. But it's a very, very interesting and informative read, at least from my point of view, if you're interested in that.
Yeah, no, that's very well, and that's a good way to end it. A good recommendation.
Yeah.
Book, The Weirdest People
Basically,
in the World.
the last word about it, it says that what the West was able to do was tear down this kinship-based system of social organization to make it more voluntary and sort of community-based rather than kinship-based. But it's a lot more complicated than that. So anyway, that's the last good read I've gotten into.
Awesome. So yeah, well, thanks for the discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun discussion, and I thought we talked about some good ideas, and hopefully the people that listen to the podcast will also enjoy it.
Mhm.
Any final thoughts?
Not at the moment.
All right. So
17 million final thoughts.
17 million. We might not have the time. We might not have the time for it.
Yeah.
So, That's a lot of thoughts, David. I asked for one.
Right.
But yeah, no, it was a good discussion, and I think relevant discussion, because this is the situation we find ourselves in right
Mhm.
now in international relations.
Mhm.
Next time, maybe we can have a discussion about income inequality. That's the next one that is planned, and that's also relevant to our world.
Oh, yeah.
Now, are you on the every 2 weeks schedule?
We'll figure it out. I don't know. I don't know. I think we're all like, yeah, obviously, I've been organized.
Talking
So I
like a
have more
true
responsibility.
politician.
But we're all kind of like in different. Vladimir is still trying to wake up, like
Yeah, yeah,
we're all like
yeah.
Michael is moving to Florida. We're all in different
Yeah.
different states, but no, but we'll yeah, I mean, we'll hopefully we'll be able to figure out also the good schedule, and
Now, I have a question.
yeah.
Are you going to continue this after the pandemic is over?
Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly continue. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean,
All right.
I don't think personally, because I used to organize stuff in person, but I don't think I'll organize stuff in person anymore, because I already have the podcast with you guys, and I like having these conversations the way we have them. And if I have a different meetup, I think it will be different. It won't be the same. It will be about different things, different kind of different subjects altogether. It won't be a philosophy meetup. So,
Mhm.
but I think I'm happy with the podcast, and this way people can listen to us on YouTube, and it's a global community. Hopefully, we can
Yeah.
grow our viewership and grow our community. We'll have more. We'll do this for years to come. Have different people join the group, listen to the podcast. I like the possibilities.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the people that are in Minnesota, I mean, we can still see each other.
Right.
We have a sort of thriving. It was thriving before, but now it will be thriving again. With the end of the pandemic, people still get together in Minnesota. And
Well, I'll tell you what I like. I like being able to walk into another room and click a couple of buttons and talk to you guys.
yeah, me too. I like
Yeah.
that, and I like that I can talk to you, and we don't need to be in the same place necessarily.
Yeah.
Right. To
Like
get the more-
Michael is moving to Florida, and it's not a big
Yeah.
deal. Like I don't really care he's moving to Florida. I mean, it's nice to see him in person and everything, but we're still gonna, we usually do this together. So it's the beauty of technology. Vladimir is
Yeah.
in Russia, and it doesn't matter. I mean, we
No.
can still have Vladimir, so
And
that's
it's nice to have points of view coming from people who are rooted in different geographical milieux.
That's true.
That's
true.
That's
Yeah.
true. In fact,
We can
Uh,
have a really like global conversation, right? Which is not possible in Minnesota. I
no.
mean, we're extremely cosmopolitan in Twin Cities. Well, not as much as New York, of course, or something like that. But still, we got people from all over the world.
Right.
But it's still different. I mean, like YouTube, that's global, right? I mean, it's not one country. It's humankind. We can have discussions. People from all over the world can, and actually they do. I mean, we have a small viewership, but hopefully in time it will grow. But it's not a country. It's people from all over the world that will
Yeah.
find us and like us and maybe join us, like Vladimir. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's someone in Eden Prairie or if it's someone in Moscow. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Absolutely.
Or someone in Afghanistan. If you're having conversations in Minnesota, right?
Right.
You're not going to reach those people in Kandahar, but on YouTube you reach them,
Mhm.
which is how cool is
Yeah.
that? I mean, that's kind of like a unique
Right.
thing in human history. We've never had something like this.
No, haven't. And there are, people who've never had never experienced anything except this, what we're experiencing right now.
It's
Younger
it's
people,
unique,
this
yeah.
is the world that they grew up in.
So
Great.
yeah, to answer your question, yeah, definitely, if you want to do it, we'll do it. Yeah, for sure.
Well said, Bruno.
And hopefully it's a long time project, long-term project. So,
I'm all for that.
I'm in.
Yeah.
all right, let's do it. So yeah, thanks for the discussion.
Okay.
I'm gonna end the live
have a good-
feed. Thanks for watching.
I hope you have a great dinner lined up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks for the discussion. Thanks for listening. And hopefully we all get something from this.
Sure. We sure do.